The deadly attack on New Year's Day in New Orleans was shocking. 14 people were killed, with dozens injured, after a man rammed a pickup truck into a crowd of revelers. In the aftermath, one chilling detail emerged. There was an Islamic State flag in the truck.
And because it was New Year's Day, the details were a bit slow to come in, but we kept seeing little things that made us think, oh, wow, could this be ISIS? Could this be another attack just like the ones we've seen before? And the more we learned, the more concerned we got. And then, of course, the kicker was, whoops, they found an ISIS flag in this guy's truck. And our thinking was, oh, boy, here we go again.
Joby Warrick covers terrorism at The Post. He wrote a book about ISIS. He says the New Orleans attack shares ingredients with other recent attacks inspired by the group.
What we've seen in the last few years is that more and more these attacks are not necessarily sort of directed, coordinated in some way by the Islamic State, but people are inspired by ISIS. And then what you see are these seemingly random attacks around the world in which somebody just gets the idea in their head that they're going to be a terrorist, and they're going to become part of ISIS. And the amazing thing about ISIS, it's the easiest club in the world to join. You don't have to be recruited or indoctrinated. You just do something.
Joby and Post reporter Sued McKennett recently investigated one of those attacks. It involved a young man also inspired by ISIS. He plotted to bomb a Taylor Swift concert last August in Austria. The attack was stopped, but out of precaution, Swift's concerts in Austria were called off.
We begin with the breaking news. 3 Taylor Swift concerts canceled in Europe because of the threat of a terror attack.
One of these suspects is a 19-year-old man that authorities believe was radicalized online and had pledged some type of allegiance to the so-called Islamic State.
For Joby, the case revealed how ISIS can lead people, especially younger people, to self-radicalize, and how ISIS is maintaining its influence worldwide.
What we've noticed in these cases, and in particular in the Vienna case, because here we were able to actually look at text messages, hundreds of them, this young individual's attempts to communicate with ISIS, to find kinship online. And what you find is maybe they don't have close friendships or they're alienated in their personal life. And so they're looking for a community, as people do. And what ISIS provides is a place to belong, a way to belong to a cause for these kids who are just angry at the world and want to lash out. And ISIS provides that opportunity. It provides the inspiration, the material, the propaganda, and in some cases, instruction, detailed instruction about how to carry out a terrorist attack.
From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Rachel Siegel. I'm your guest host today. It's Monday, January 6th. Today, how ISIS radicalizes people around the world. Joby, it's been less than a week since this attack in New Orleans on New Year's Day. What more have the authorities learned about the man accused of ramming that truck into a crowd of people on Bourbon Street?
Well, a couple of things we know. There obviously is much to still be determined through the investigation, but we do know that this man was inspired by ISIS. We know that from his own video recordings. He recorded a number of Facebook posts as he was actually driving to the scene of the attack in New Orleans. And we also know that he spent a lot of time thinking about this attack and preparing for it. And some of the details that have come out just in the last few days really underscore the extent to which this man was planning an act of carnage. And it's chilling now in hindsight to see the way that thing came together.
And do we know, did he do this with the help of ISIS or anyone else?
All indications so far are that he was self-radicalized. He did this on his own. There's no indication yet that he, coordinated with anybody, that he reached out to ISIS, spoke to anyone there. He did pledge allegiance to ISIS, and that seems to be a common thread with a lot of these attacks. These individuals, even if they're completely self-motivated, without any coordination with ISIS, they feel compelled to post a video of themselves swearing allegiance to the group, and that's something this guy certainly did. But as far as we know, he didn't actually contact them. This was somebody who chose to kill a lot of people, thought about killing members of his own family, and then decided, no, I'm going to make this about a blow on behalf of the Islamic State. I'm going to make it as brutal and bloody as I possibly can.
And just as the New Orleans attack was happening, you were finishing a deep dive about another incident from last summer in Vienna when the Taylor Swift concerts were happening there. What have you learned about the young man, the suspect behind that planned attack? And can you help us understand what was similar, what patterns may have existed between that plan and what happened a couple of days ago?
So there are a number of striking similarities and some important differences, but the similarities include you hear individuals who were conservative Muslims who adhere to a very strict conservative view of Islam, but had been, for a variety of reasons, just very frustrated in their life's ambitions. And in the case of New Orleans, here's a guy that, had multiple failed marriages. His business had gone bust. He was in financial trouble and debt to a lot of people. So his life had completely unraveled. And what we saw in the Vienna case was something pretty similar. Here's a young man that had, been a bit of an outcast in school, had gotten a job, but that ended up quitting it because of his, what he described as mental problems, had no friends or very few close friendships, was alienated from his parents, and just really had lost any sense of purpose in his life and was looking to lash out. And we saw both of these individuals, radicalize online, to fixate on ISIS state media, and then decide for their own reasons to carry out this brutal attack.
And remind us, what exactly happened in Vienna, or I should say didn't happen because the authorities intervened?
So this attack, and I think many of our listeners will remember this, it was set to occur on the second date of a 3-day show that Taylor Swift was doing in Vienna, the capital of Austria. And what we learned from our reporting and from our access to these documents was that a single individual, a 19-year-old, so someone who had just finished high school, he'd had his first job as an apprentice at a factory, but someone who had a lot of problems, who had been, flagged at school as being misogynist, being antisocial. He was a religious kid, by background, but he was becoming more and more extreme and saying some disturbing things. So people had their eye on him as someone who might be potentially problematic, but quietly, on his own, he began putting together a plan for a terrorist attack. In the beginning, he didn't know exactly what he was going to do, but here's an opportunity that comes along just by happenstance. Taylor Swift is coming to Austria. There's going to be a lot of people, a lot of media interest. What a chance for him to sort of make a name for himself, even in an act of martyrdom, killing himself, but sort of bringing attention to his problems and then by association to the Islamic State through some horrific terrorist attack.
And in this case, authorities intervened. They caught the suspect beforehand, preventing an attack. The concerts were canceled. Joby, what did you learn in that reporting about how someone goes from feeling isolated, perhaps dealing with a mental health crisis, and then moving into an ISIS chat room, right? That feels like quite a leap. So what have you learned about the patterns that can lead to something like that?
Because we have all these messages, it really is, it's an interesting narrative that emerges from this about step by step what happened to him. And he goes from a kid who's just, unhappy about his life. In one conversation that he had with police officers after his arrest, he talked about his obsession with death. He thought about death all the time. But he also was thinking, he had a sense of, he was rejecting mainstream culture because he was a conservative Muslim. He thought he was offended by Western dress and Western music and angry with his friends who liked these things and just saw himself as being more and more apart from everyone else. And as he's ruminating on these things, and around early July of last year, as it turns out, he starts kind of reaching out. He starts looking for, things that might help him carry out a terrorist attack because this is in his mind. And we see him doing things like trying to find a weapon. And it becomes very interesting. He goes on Telegram. Somebody gives him him the name of a person who may sell guns. So he's having this dialogue with a person who's in America, as it turns out. He wants to know, can I buy a gun? Can you ship to Austria? How much would it cost? Can I get a grenade? Would it blow up a car? And then it turns out that because the kid's only 19, he doesn't have a job anymore, he finds out he doesn't have enough money to do any of that. But it's interesting to see him go through the steps one by one to figure out what kind of weapons could a kid like me acquire for a terrorist attack.
There's another recent incident that doesn't quite seem to fit with the Islamic State motives, but is hard to ignore just given the nature of these indiscriminate attacks. I'm talking about what happened in Germany at a crowded Christmas market when a man drove into it on December 20th and injured more than 200 people. He killed at least 5. This suspect is reported to have had anti-Islamic views and motives. But Joby, does anything stand out to you about this attack? And is there any connection to what we're observing here or in Austria or in the other types of attacks that you follow?
Well, what I see is a pathology that it's broader than people who are, Islamists, who are extremists on this end of the spectrum, because it does seem to be there's this common view now that if you're unhappy with the world or if you've had you have a mental breakdown of some kind, this is something that occurs to people in that category. And what we've seen in Germany in this recent case was a man who, he was defined himself as anti-Islam. He thought that Islam was dangerous. He was an atheist as far as we could tell. He'd been, became unhinged for whatever personal reasons and decided to take a vehicle and drive into a Christmas market in the town of Magdalene. And what was remarkable, when we first saw this, we were thinking, well, here's an ISIS-inspired attack, because the exact same thing had happened in 2016 in Berlin in a Christmas market there. So this is something that ISIS has done in the past. But get into the details and realize that, no, this had no relation with ISIS at all, didn't seem to have any sympathy with their cause. And so now it's become something that occurs to people when they want to take it out on the world. There's this option of getting in a car and driving to a crowded area and killing people. And it's just it's quite disturbing to think about.
Yeah. It's also not lost on me that we're speaking on the 4-year anniversary of January 6th, when an armed mob stormed the Capitol, inciting violence based on disinformation about who won the 2020 election. Are there any other parallels or lessons that you draw from that kind of moment in history?
It's this kind of nihilistic destruction, and it's not unique to our time, but I do feel that it is certainly driven or exacerbated by social media, because in all these instances, you see people looking online for ideas and sometimes for community, for inspiration, and for whatever cause they attach themselves to. This has become something that people do, and we've seen it way too often, and there are other sort of variations of this, people who go into, crowded places with guns and shoot people or stab people. And it's just something that's become endemic. And you see it so many times for so many different reasons. But of course, ISIS has made this its brand, and it actively encourages people to do this. This is not something that it might just occur to you to do, but ISIS in its propaganda is saying, do this. Here's the kind of truck you need to get. Here's the kind of crowd you should look for, and giving detailed instructions about how to carry out an act of mass carnage. That's what makes ISIS particularly dangerous, I think.
After the break, we look at ISIS today and why these recent attacks stand out. We'll be right back. Joby, how did social media become such a powerful part of ISIS and these attacks?
Well, if you look at the story of ISIS, here's a group that came seemingly out of nowhere. They actually had a very long and complicated history. But when they established the caliphate, they sort of branded themselves as this ruthless, brutal organization that committed, atrocities, beheadings, crucifixions, throwing people off rooftops. So just the worst kind of violence, and that they revel in this and they make it their brand. They put it on social media and sort of boast about it. So that's who they were. And then comes, 2016, 17, 2018, 19, the group starts to recede because it's under attack by this coalition led by the United States, attacking their caliphate in Syria and Iraq. After the group is destroyed, it decides it's going to become this shadowy, amorphous international movement that exists in social media. And what it does, which is it's really sinister, is that it invites people who want to be part of ISIS to just do something. You don't have to be recruited. You don't have to wait for us to tell you what to do or where to do it. Just do something. Throw a bomb, run over people with a car, and then we'll take credit for it. You become part of ISIS. That's the offer they make to people. There's no other group that I can think of that operates like this, and this is their brand now, that they can reach out to people through social media and just encourage them to kill in a way that we really haven't seen anyone else do. And that, again, that makes them particularly dangerous.
What is ISIS's current mission?
So it's always been the same, and this goes back even before it called itself ISIS, but it sees itself as the authentic, pure version of Islam that should be dominant in the world, that all other forms of religious expression, including other kinds of Islamic belief, are heretical and should be physically destroyed. And so when you see the Islamic State move into territories, when they're able to capture, and control territory in Iraq and Syria, they brutally wiped out anyone who disagreed with them. Everybody had to live under their rules or they were liable to be executed. And that same fervor exists today with the group, even though they don't have territory. This is kind of part of this just hyper extreme, very virulent, very brutal view of the world. And for some people, this resonates, this message of ISIS as pure, everything else is evil. We have to overcome the rest of the world. That message comes through today in their propaganda and their videos.
Joby, can you update us on the current state of ISIS now? How powerful is the group today? How is that kind of power measured? What's happening now?
So ISIS as a movement, the caliphate, again, is gone. There's no territorial holdings in Iraq today or really in Syria, although there are cells that exist in both countries. But ISIS as a movement has metastasized, and you see daughter chapters, spin-offs around the world, and some more dangerous and some more active than others. The one that has intelligence folks really worried right now is the one that exists in Afghanistan, and it's called ISIS-K or ISIS Khorasan. And they're a little different because they do have international aspirations. They want to carry out sophisticated, organized, coordinated attacks, and we've seen them do it in the past year in Russia. There was a big attack at a concert in Moscow, at a funeral in Iran. They recruit heavily to get people to carry out attacks like this. So they're a bit different from the others. ISIS Central, the main organization, seems to be content inspiring people and trying to give ideas and, existing mostly on social media. But other groups are not like that. And we see offshoot groups in Africa that are interested in taking territory locally. They seem to be more focused on local issues. But the bottom line is they do exist around the world, even though we've, in our mind, gotten rid of this problem by destroying ISIS. And in fact, it's spread. I mean, it's impossible to destroy it completely on the internet. And every now and then, there's pressure on social media platforms to really, clean out this content to make sure that ISIS doesn't have a foothold in one of these social media platforms. But they have a way of creeping back or finding other ways to communicate. And that seems to be the pattern in the recent years we've been looking.
Mm-hmm. And just to pick up on what you were describing, what are some of the aspects of ISIS's online presence that makes it particularly powerful?
A lot of it is they're kind of built for social media in the sense that they're really good at these slickly produced videos. And we saw a lot of them during the period when ISIS still occupied territory in Iraq and Syria, where they would actually have their own film studios who would, have pretty good production quality, multiple cameras taking shots from different angles, but showing things like, a prisoner being set on fire or someone being hurled off a roof or stoned. Just horrific images, but in these slickly packaged little videos that are hard not to watch, I think, just because they're brutally compelling in their own way. And that has become, what they're very good at. And those videos, the ones from back in those days, continue to circulate, continue to have a life online. And there's new content all the time. And we know this because we monitor some of their material, and every few days you'll see a report coming out of Africa about a raid on an army outpost, and here are the soldiers we killed, or we went into these villages and we killed Christians, and here are the bodies. And it's a constant torrent of this kind of material. And again, years after the caliphate supposedly went away, they're still very active and they're still producing a lot of this content.
But as we mentioned earlier, ISIS itself has not yet claimed responsibility for the attack in New Orleans or the failed plot in Austria. How much does that matter exactly?
It's a bit curious because in the past, the pattern of the Islamic State was to quickly claim credit for everything. And then we as reporters or investigators would have to go back and figure out, well, did they really have anything to do with this? And lately, as you said, they've been curiously silent about some of these high-profile attacks. They haven't said a word about New Orleans. And there's been a lot of speculation about the reasons. And one possibility is that ISIS so the central leadership is very much on its back foot right now. It is believed that the sort of the main organization, the headquarters for this organization still existed in Syria. And after the fall of the Syrian president just a few weeks ago, very quietly behind the scenes, the United States very aggressively went after what it believed were ISIS safe houses and headquarters and weapons storage facilities. And there was a period of several days of pretty intense attacks and bombings, including using B-52s, so very large, military aircraft being, participating in this. And what we've seen since then is an unusual silence from ISIS. And, one possibility is that their leadership has been under such pressure that they are literally not in a position to be able to speak out about these attacks. And that's just a theory. They may come out tomorrow and say, oh, this was us. But right now they've been strangely silent.
So just to note that today is the first day of Mardi Gras parades, just days after the deadly attack in New Orleans. President Biden is also visiting New Orleans today. I'm curious, Joby, how you think law enforcement officials might be responding to what has already happened in New Orleans, but, looking ahead when it comes to detecting and stopping any more attacks like this. What would some of their biggest challenges be?
There is a real worry about copycat attacks, and it's a significant worry because we do see, these young individuals, following the example of people who went before them. And one instance, this young man in Austria who wanted to attack a Taylor Swift concert, he watched very closely what happened in 2017 when another American pop singer, Ariana Grande, was having a concert in Manchester, England, and a young man decided to attack or blow himself up outside that concert and killed 22 people. So there is this sense that someone carries out a successful attack and then other people want to try to do the same. And there's limited number of things that people can do to stop those. Obviously, it's very important to protect crowded areas. And we see there was a failure with New Orleans authorities in this case because they had failed to put up the barriers and had the equipment in place to make sure there wasn't an attack like this. And so the suspect in this case found an opportunity, found an opening. And so there are things you can do to try to limit the damage, but you can't stop every person who wants to get a car and run over people. It's just impossible to do. Mm-hmm. And then so the other question becomes, how do you stop people from radicalizing? And that is a much harder challenge. It's sometimes it's impossible if people are not communicating online about their plans. And even if they are, if it's an American citizen, for example, we have privacy protections that prevent the government from just randomly listening in on people's conversations. There has to be a reason. Somebody has to get a warrant to wiretap. And without that, we sometimes are blind to radicalization that goes on right under our noses. And one thing we hear from law enforcement people all the time is that they really need the help of the community. They need the imam of the local mosque or the principal in a school or somebody who has a concern about somebody who seems to be going down a dangerous road. And there needs to be early intervention or at least some effort to reach out to this person to make sure they're not preparing to do something dangerous.
Joby, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
Joby Warwick is a national security reporter who covers terrorism at The Post. Before we go, there are two other stories I want to tell you about today. First, Congress certified President-elect Donald Trump's victory over Vice President Kamala Harris in the November presidential election.
The whole number of the electors appointed to vote for President of the United States is 538. Within that whole number, the majority is 270. The votes for President of the United States are as follows. Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 312 votes. Kamala D. Harris.
Both chambers came together early this afternoon to count electoral votes. Harris presided over the vote in her constitutional role as president of the Senate. Again, you'll probably remember this process from 4 years ago on January 6, 2021. That's when that violent mob of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol to delay the tally of votes showing that Joe Biden defeated Trump in the 2020 election. More than 1,500 people have been charged with federal crimes stemming from that riot. Trump has pledged to pardon many of those defendants during his first hour in office on January 20th. In other news, it snowed. Huge swaths of the country are experiencing a snow day from the Midwest to the Mid-Atlantic, and the people, my dog included, are loving it. That sound from Meridian Hill Park in Washington, D.C., where dozens of people gathered earlier today for a snowball fight and to celebrate what could be D.C.'s largest snowstorm since 2022. Video journalist Hadley Green spoke with two people getting ready for the snowball fight, Damir Amorali and Trevor Barton. They live in D.C.
It's rare that you get an opportunity to just kind of have a nostalgic moment to be a kid again, which is what we're doing.
And creating a happy memory. That's why we're here.
Yeah. Yep. It's all about the memories.
I love the snow, but if you've been on the move, I get why you may not be as into it. Travelers are facing cancellations and delays in all forms of transit, planes, trains, and buses. Hundreds of flights have been canceled out of airports near D.C. Amtrak has canceled many trains along the Northeast Corridor. And in the Midwest, at least 3 fatalities have been reported in traffic accidents. And even if you haven't been traveling, you might still be experiencing some major impacts from the storm. Hundreds of thousands of people from Missouri to Virginia had power outages on Monday. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. If you're looking for the latest updates on the big news of the day, check out our morning news briefing, The 7. We bring you the 7 stories you need to know about every weekday morning by 7 a.m. You can listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts. Today's show was produced by Alana Gordon with help from Ariel Plotnick and Rennie Svirnovsky. It was mixed by Sam Baer and edited by Monica Campbell with help from Rena Flores. Thank you to Hadley Green. I'm Rachel Siegel. Thank you to listeners for letting me guest host. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from the Washington Post.